A wooden gavel slammed down on a block of black velvet. A chain rattled across cold stone. A barefoot young woman was shoved forward into the torchlight, her wrists bound, her eyes sealed shut with thin silver thread. The auctioneer lifted her chin with the tip of his cane. The crowd of hooded buyers leaned forward as one. Coins clinked. A voice in the back called out a single gold piece. The auctioneer smiled. Another voice, deeper, closer to the wall, answered with two. A growl rolled through the room from a giant in a wolfskin cloak who had not yet spoken. He raised one finger. 100 gold. The room went silent. Then a man in a black silk mask, sitting alone in the highest balcony, set a single copper penny on the velvet tray and waited. Why would the vampire king outbid the entire room with 1 cent? Stay with me on this one. Her name was Eloan. She had been told that name once, by a woman who washed her face the morning she was sold. The woman said it gently, like an apology. Eloan had repeated it under her breath all the way down the wagon road, in case she forgot it inside the auction house. She was 23 years old. She had worked in a textile workhouse since she was old enough to hold a thread. She had never seen the sky, because she had no eyes that worked, only two thin lines of silver stitched across the lids where her lashes should have been. She did not remember anyone sewing them shut. They had always been that way. Inside the workhouse, the older women had told her she was lucky. A blind girl could not flinch from the loom. A blind girl could not see the overseer when he raised his hand. A blind girl, they said, learned to hear better than any of them. And it was true. Eloan could hear a coin drop 2 rooms away. She could hear a man breathing on the other side of a wooden wall. She could hear the difference between a smile and a grimace, just from the way the air moved across a person's teeth. That was how she knew the man in the silk mask was not human. He had not breathed once since she stepped onto the block. She had counted 43 seconds. No rise of a chest. No catch in the throat. No shift of cloth. Living men did not stay that still. Living men could not. She knew this because she had stood blind in a workhouse for 15 years and had learned to read men by the small sounds they could not help making. The masked man on the balcony made no small sounds. He made no sound at all. And yet she could feel his attention on her like a hand resting on the top of her head. The auctioneer, sweating now, tried to keep order. He explained that a copper penny was, by the strictest rules of the underground market, a legal bid. He explained that the rules said the highest bidder in standing currency took the goods. He did not say that no one in living memory had ever set a copper down against 100 gold. The hooded buyers murmured. The giant in the wolfskin cloak turned his head slowly toward the balcony and bared a long white tooth. The masked man on the balcony did not move. The auctioneer struck the gavel. Sold. To the gentleman in the upper box. For 1 copper penny. Eloan heard the giant in the wolfskin cloak stand up. The wooden bench groaned under him as he rose. She heard him take 1 step forward, and the entire room took 1 step back. He did not run. He did not roar. He simply turned toward the balcony stairs and began to climb. A hand closed around Eloan's elbow. Cool. Steady. Not rough. The masked man had come down from his balcony, so quietly she had not heard a single footstep. He smelled of cold stone and old wine, and something faint underneath like iron. He spoke against her ear, low and calm, in a voice that did not belong to anyone she had ever met. He said, "Walk with me, and do not let go of my hand, no matter what you hear." She did not ask who he was. She did not ask where they were going. A girl sold at auction does not ask questions. She closed her fingers around his and let him pull her down the stone steps and out a side door she had not known existed. Behind them, the giant in the wolfskin cloak reached the empty balcony and let out a howl that cracked the lanterns along the ceiling. Eloan flinched. The masked man's grip tightened, just enough to tell her she was safe, then loosened again, just enough to tell her she was not a prisoner. He walked her through a tunnel of black brick. She heard rats scatter. She heard water dripping into deep water. She heard a horse, somewhere ahead, stamping its hoof against cobblestone. The masked man lifted her into a carriage with one hand under her elbow and one hand at the small of her back, the way a brother might lift a sister, not the way a buyer lifted a thing he had purchased. Inside the carriage, he sat across from her. She heard him remove his gloves. She heard him fold them once, twice, and set them on the bench beside him. He said, "My name is Kalen. I will not touch you again unless you ask me to." The carriage rolled. Aloan pressed her bound wrists into her lap and listened to the wheels. She tried to count the turns so she would know the way back, in case she ever needed to run. She lost count after the 7th turn. Her hands were shaking. She did not know why. She had been sold twice before, once at 12 and once at 18. She had not shaken either time. She had learned not to. Kalen, the masked man, said quietly, "You can sleep if you want. The road is long. No one will reach this carriage." She did not sleep, but she did stop counting turns. The horse's hooves made a steady, even rhythm. The air outside the carriage grew colder and cleaner. She smelled pine. She smelled snow. She smelled, very faintly, something that might have been the sea. She wanted to ask him what he was. She did not. A girl who has been sold 3 times in her life learns when not to speak. She also wanted to ask him why his voice did not sound like other men's voices. There was a stillness inside his vowels, the way a frozen pond is still under a layer of clear ice. She listened for him to breathe. He did once in the 2nd hour of the ride. A single slow breath. As if he had remembered from a long way away that humans needed to hear it. When the carriage finally stopped, a great gate creaked open. She heard the gate close behind them with a sound like a coffin lid settling. Then she heard 100 voices at once, soft, hushed, leaning forward. She heard skirts rustle. She heard boots click on marble. She heard a single woman gasp and whisper, "The king has brought home a human girl." A king. Kalen helped her down from the carriage. The marble was cold under her bare feet. He did not let her stand on it long. He swept her up in his arms, the way no one had ever carried her, and walked her up a long flight of steps. She could feel the air change as they crossed under each archway. She counted the archways. There were 9. He set her down at last on a thick rug in front of a fireplace. The heat hit her cheeks like a soft slap. She had never stood this close to a real fire. He cut her wrist binding with a small knife that made no sound coming out of its sheath. He pressed a cup of something warm into her hands. Honey wine. Real honey wine. She had only ever smelled it from the kitchens, never tasted it. She took a sip, and her shoulders dropped just a little. He noticed. He did not comment. He said, "You are in the castle of Noctira. I am the king here. You are not a slave in this house. You are a guest. There is a room 1 door down, with a bed and a bath drawn for you. There is a maid waiting outside. Her name is Myra. She will not lie to you. She will not touch your face. If you want to leave in the morning, I will give you a horse and a purse, and a written safe passage to any border you choose." Eloan lowered the cup. She said, "Why?" He was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Somewhere far down a hallway, a clock chimed. He said, "Because you are not what the man in the wolfskin cloak said you were." She said, "What did he say I was?" Kalen said, "He said you were the last one. He said you were the bride." She did not know what that meant. She drank the rest of the honey wine. Her shoulders dropped a little more. For one moment in front of that fire, with warm bread on a plate at her elbow, and a real king sitting 4 feet away who had asked her permission before he touched her, Eloan almost smiled. She had not almost smiled in 9 years. She remembered the last time. It had been a winter morning at the workhouse. A small bird had landed on the windowsill near her loom. She had not been able to see it, but she had heard its tiny claws skitter on the wood, and she had felt the air shift as it tilted its head. She had stopped working for 1 second. The overseer had hit her across the back of the neck for it. The bird had flown away. She had not almost smiled since. Now, in this strange, warm room with a king who would not touch her, the corner of her mouth lifted by almost nothing at all. Kalen noticed. He still did not comment, but she heard him set his own cup down very softly, as if he did not want to startle the moment out of the room. A wolf howled. Inside the castle walls. Not outside. Inside. Kalen stood up so fast the chair behind him fell. The honey wine sloshed in Aloin's cup. She heard him cross the room in 3 steps. She heard him pull something long and curved off the wall. Steel. A sword. He said, Myra, take her to the cellar. Now. A hand smaller, faster, gentler than his caught Aloin under the arm. The maid. Myra. She smelled like lavender and starch. She did not ask questions. She pulled Aloin up off the rug and walked her, almost ran her, down a stone stairwell that curled and curled. Behind them, somewhere up in the great hall, Aloin heard the wolf howl again. Then she heard a second one answer it. Then a third. Then a sound she had only ever heard in the workhouse, when a loom collapsed under its own weight. The sound of a wall breaking inward. Myra whispered, the Lycan Emperor is here. He has come for you. Aloin said, who is the Lycan Emperor? Myra said, the man in the wolfskin cloak. The one the king outbid. He rules every wolf clan from the snow line to the sea. He came to the auction tonight to buy you for one reason. To kill you before our king could find out you existed. Aloin pressed her hand flat against the cold stone wall to keep from falling. The cellar steps kept curling. She said, why does he want me dead? Myra said, because of what is under your eyelids, child. Because of what your eyes will do the moment somebody cuts that thread. Aloin pressed her free hand to her own eyelids. She had touched them 1,000 times. She had never thought about them as anything but a closed door. Now she felt the silver thread, finer than spider silk, humming faintly against her fingertips. She had been told her whole life that the thread was a kindness. The midwives had whispered it. The workhouse women had said it. Even the priest who came once a month had blessed her closed eyes and called them merciful. None of them had known what they were really blessing. She said, why did no one tell me? Myra said, because no one was supposed to know you had survived this long. Every other moonbound bride was found and killed before she was old enough to ask questions. You are the first who ever made it to the auction block. The witch who hid you must have loved you very much. If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want to hear the rest of these. Now back to her. Myra shoved a heavy oak door open and pulled Aloin inside. The cellar smelled of iron and dust and old wax. Aloin heard glass jars rattle on shelves. She heard a slow drip from somewhere overhead. She heard Myra slide a wooden bar across the door from the inside, then a second bar of iron, then a third bar that sounded like silver chain. Myra pressed Aloin down onto a low bench against the wall and knelt in front of her. Aloin could feel the maid's hands hovering, not touching, the way Kalen's had hovered. Myra said, listen to me. Listen carefully. 300 years ago, a witch sealed a baby girl's eyes with silver thread the morning she was born. The witch did it because the baby had been born with the moon mark in her left iris and the sun mark in her right. A moonbound bride. The witch hid her in a human workhouse to keep her alive. She did this once every generation. Every moonbound bride has died before she ever opened her eyes. You are the last one. There are no more after you. Aloin said, what is a moonbound bride? Myra said, a moonbound bride can do exactly one of 3 things. She can crown a vampire king for 1,000 years by choosing him with her open eyes. She can crown a Lycan emperor for 1,000 years by choosing him instead. Or she can refuse them both and end every vampire and every Lycan on this earth in a single sunrise. Whichever she does it the first time she opens her eyes. Above them the castle shook. Plaster fell from the cellar ceiling. Aloin heard the king shouting orders. She heard steel ring against steel. She heard a body fall. She heard another body fall. She heard Kalen's voice, cold and even, telling someone to fall back to the south wing. Myra said, "The Lycan Emperor knows you are here. He knows you do not yet know which choice is yours. He wants to take your head before you open your eyes. If you die blind, the bloodline ends without choosing, and the Lycans rule unopposed forever. That is what he came for." Aloan sat very still on the bench. She felt the silver thread across her eyelids for the first time in her life as something real. It tingled. It pulled. It had been waiting 23 years for her to notice it. She said, "The king. Kalen. Does he know all of this?" Myra said, "He has known since the moment he saw the silver thread in the auctioneer's torchlight. That is why he bid 1 copper penny. He wanted the rest of the room to remember that he won you for nothing, so no one could ever say he bought you. He wanted you to be a guest, not a purchase. He wanted you to choose him freely, if you ever chose anyone at all." A heavy step landed on the stairs outside the cellar door. Then a second step. Then a voice that vibrated in the stone itself spoke through the wood. The Lycan Emperor. He had reached the cellar. He said, "Little blind girl, come out. Your king is bleeding upstairs. He cannot save you. I can make this quick. Open the door, and I promise you will not feel the blade. Stay in there, and I will burn this castle down around your ears." Aloan reached up. Slowly, her own fingertips found the thin silver thread sewn through her eyelids. She had touched it 1,000 times before without ever understanding it. Now she understood. Now she felt the pulse in it, the small electric hum that had always been there, the hum she had thought was just the sound her eyelashes made. She said, "Myra, bring me the king." Myra said, "Child, I cannot open this door." Aloan said, "Then bring me a knife." Myra went very still. Then Aloan heard the soft scrape of a small blade being pulled from a sheath at the maid's hip. The maid set the handle in Aloan's palm. It was warm from her body. It was light, finely balanced, the kind of knife a noblewoman might carry hidden in a sleeve. Aloan closed her fingers around it. Above them, another wall came down. The Lycan Emperor laughed through the cellar door. Aloan said, "Take me up. Take me to the garden. The Black Rose Garden. He told me there was one." Myra said, "Child, no." Aloan said, "Take me, or I will go alone, and I will trip on the stairs, and I will reach him with my throat cut and the silver thread still in my eyes, and you will have to live the rest of your life knowing you let the last moonbound bride die in a cellar." Myra pulled the silver chain off the door. She pulled the iron bar off the door. She paused on the wooden bar. Then she pulled that off too. She opened the door, ducked under the Lycan Emperor's reaching arm, hooked Aloan's elbow, and pulled her up the back servant stairs that no wolf knew about. They came out into cold night air. Aloan smelled black roses. Real ones. Heavy, sweet, sharp. She smelled wet stone. She smelled blood somewhere not far enough away. Myra pressed her down onto her knees in soft earth, in the center of a circle of rose bushes, then ran. Aloan heard her run. Then she heard one set of footsteps coming toward her through the garden. Slow, even, familiar. Kalen knelt in front of her. He was breathing hard. He smelled of smoke and his own blood. His mask was gone. She felt his hand cup her face, gently, gently, the way you hold a sparrow. He said, "You should not be out here." She said, "Cut the thread." He said, "Aloan, once it is cut, every vampire and every Lycan in this kingdom will feel it. The council and the city will rise against me. The wolves at the gate will charge. You will see all at once, more than any newborn eye should see. You will have to choose before you have time to think." She said, "I have had 23 years to think." "Cut it." He pulled a small silver knife from his belt. She heard the sound of it leaving the sheath. She heard him whisper an apology under his breath, not to her, to whoever had sewn the thread shut so long ago. Then she felt the cold tip of the blade slide under the first stitch. He cut. A single thread fell against her cheek. He cut again. A second thread fell into her lap. The third cut, the last cut, came with a small wet sound and the warmth of one tear of blood. Her eyelids, untrained, fluttered open for the first time in her life. The world poured in. She saw the black roses first because they were closest. She saw their shape before she understood color. She saw a sky full of stars overhead, hard and bright. She saw Kalen's face, narrow and pale, 300 years old, the kindest eyes she had ever felt with her hands now finally seen. She saw past his shoulder a wall of crouched wolves in human armor, their eyes glowing yellow, and at their front the Lycan Emperor himself mid-stride, his silver dagger already raised. The Lycan Emperor froze. He froze because the moon mark in her left iris had lit up like a small white star. The sun mark in her right iris had lit up gold. The two marks together cast soft light across the garden. The roses turned silver where the light touched them. The wolves shrank back. The vampires on the far balconies of the castle dropped to one knee in unison, without being told. The Lycan Emperor lowered the dagger. He did not lower it because he wanted to. He lowered it because the light from her eyes had wrapped around his wrist and was holding it. He said, "Choose me, girl. I am the older line. I am the larger army. Choose me, and your name will be carved in every mountain." Kalen did not speak. He simply stayed kneeling in front of her, his hand still cupping her cheek, his thumb at the corner of her mouth, his eyes asking nothing. Eloin looked at the Lycan Emperor for a long moment. She had heard him at the auction. She had heard the way the room moved when he stood. She had heard the way Myra's voice tightened when she said his name. She had heard him through the cellar door promise a quick blade. She turned her face into Kalen's hand. She said, "I choose the man who paid 1 penny for me, because he is the only one who understood I was not for sale." She said it loud enough for the Lycan Emperor to hear. She said it loud enough for the wolves to hear. She said it loud enough for the vampires on the balconies to hear. She said it loud enough for the witch who had sewn her eyes shut 23 years ago, wherever she was, to finally hear it too. The light in her eyes pulsed once hard. The Lycan Emperor staggered back 3 steps. The wolves behind him collapsed onto their bellies, whining. The vampires on the balconies rose. Somewhere in the city, a great bell began to ring on its own. The mark of a chosen king. 1,000 years. Kalen exhaled. It was the first breath she had ever heard him take. He whispered, "Thank you." Not as a king. As a man. The Lycan Emperor stood at the edge of the rose garden with his dagger still raised, but his arm could no longer move forward. He looked at Eloin for a long time. He did not look angry. He looked old. He looked like someone who had been hunting one girl for 300 years and now understood that she had been a person the entire time. He lowered his arm. He sheathed the dagger. He bowed once very slowly, the way an emperor bows only to another crown. Then he turned and walked back through his own line of wolves. The wolves rose and followed him in silence. By the time the sun came up, every print they had left in the garden mud was gone, washed away by a soft rain that no one had felt fall. Kalen helped Eloin to her feet. He did not carry her this time. He let her walk. She walked slowly, because walking with sight was new, and the ground was not where her feet had thought it would be. He stayed at her elbow. He did not steer her. He just stayed there. Inside the castle, the council of vampire lords waited in the great hall. They had seen the light from the garden. They had felt the bell in the city. Most of them knelt when she entered. A few did not. The few who did not were quietly escorted out by morning, and Eloin never asked where they went. She suspected she did not need to know. They were married in the obsidian chapel 3 nights later, under a window of black glass, with Myra holding the train of a dress that had been made for a queen 4 generations ago and never worn. Eloin could see the dress now. She thought it was beautiful. She also thought it was a little heavy. She said so out loud, and Kalen laughed for the first time in 100 years, and the sound of it made 2 of the older lords look up sharply, as if they had forgotten he could. She kept the silver thread. all 3 pieces of it. She had Myra put them in a small wooden box on the dresser in her new room. The box had been carved by a vampire craftsman who had not known what it was for. He had carved a simple moon on the lid and a simple sun beside it, because Myra had asked him to and had not explained why. Aloan opened that box once a year, on the night that matched the night of the auction. She would lift the 3 threads out, hold them in her palm, and remember the weight of them on her eyelids. Then she would put them back. The kingdom of Noctira entered a long peace. Not a perfect peace. There were small wars on the borders, and there were vampire lords who muttered into their wine about a human queen, and there were lichen clans deep in the snow line who refused to recognize the new order. But the great war that everyone had been bracing for did not come. The lichen emperor lived another 40 years and never crossed the southern river again. When he died, his successor sent Aloan a single black rose and a sealed letter she chose not to open. She lived a long life for a human, longer than she should have. The vampire bond stretched her years. She saw the city grow. She saw children born in houses where children had not been allowed before. She saw the underground auction house, the one with the velvet block and the gas lamps, taken apart stone by order of the crown. The stones were used to build a school for blind girl on the edge of the cathedral square. Aloan visited it every winter. She would sit in the back row of the smallest classroom and listen to the children read aloud. She did not tell them who she was. She just listened. Once a year, on the night that matched the auction, she would walk alone to the spot where the velvet block had stood. The cobblestones there had been replaced with a single round stone of black marble. No name was carved on it. No date. Only a small silver inlay in the shape of a penny. She would stand on it for 1 minute. She would put her hand over her own eyes, the way she had stood at 23. Then she would lower her hand and walk home through the new lamplight, past doors that opened to her, past faces that bowed to her, past a city that had once almost ended because of her, and now lived because of her. On the last night of her life, she lay in her bed with Kalen sitting in a chair beside her. He had not aged. He would not age. They both knew that. She did not ask him to follow her. He did not offer. They had talked about it a long time ago, in a different room, by a different fire. She asked him to bring her the wooden box. He brought it. She opened it with hands that were thin now, and spotted and slow. She lifted the 3 silver threads out and laid them across her palm. She looked at them for a long while. Then she closed her hand around them, and she closed her eyes, and she said the only words she had ever wanted to say at the end. She said, "Thank you for the penny." Kalen took her closed hand in both of his. He pressed his forehead to her knuckles. He did not speak. He did not need to. Outside, in a garden that had grown wider every year, the black roses bloomed out of season. A soft light, moon white on one side, sun gold on the other, drifted up off the petals and out across the city of Noctira, and every blind girl in the school by the cathedral lifted her face toward a warmth she could not name, but somehow had always known was hers.